Hi Year 11, this is another video in the Christianity unit from Mr. Azapadi. You're going to need a couple of resources that I've put on Teams. One is a part of the Bible, the story of the fall, and the other one is a little worksheet called Why is the Fall Important to Christians? Here's the title: How can we explain the importance of the fall to Christians? You will need to do some work on paper as well as on the worksheet. If you can't print out the worksheet, then you can just complete the worksheet online. There's actually not loads to write on it. It's more like ticking boxes really. So how can we explain the importance of the fall to Christians? Now, before we begin, go into the next slide. The fall is the word that Christians give to when Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden ate the apple, or not the apple, as we'll see, it's not an apple, the fruit from the tree that they were forbidden to eat from, and then the consequences of that. So why is it called the fall? Well, it's the idea of fall from grace of humanity, the idea that humans were created in a perfect way and then they went wrong, they went against God. So the fall from being being perfect to being as humans are now, and involved in that for some Christians is a teaching of original sin. So let's have a look what we're talking about. Here's Adam and Eve in the garden. You see some fruit there, you see a snake. You should be familiar with some of this story already. What I want you to do is read the story of the fall that I've printed out, that's on the sheet there for you. It's from Genesis chapter 3. So that means we've done, last lesson we did Genesis chapter 1 and 2. Here we're doing Genesis chapter 3. So we're kind of following on. That's why the fall comes after creation. Okay, when you read the reading, I want you to see if you can answer in your notes these four questions. What did Adam and Eve do wrong? How are they punished? How does what they do affect people today? What role does the devil play? So if you pause the video, I'll come and then when you've added your answers, play it again and I'll just go through some things to do with those answers. Okay, you should have answered those questions now. What did Adam and Eve do wrong? They eat the fruit from the tree in the centre of the garden, which God had told them not to eat from. It doesn't say apple tree, it just says fruit. How are they punished? Well, you should have that Eve is punished. She says, I will make your pains in childbearing very severe. So the idea is that before this, she took the fruit, there was no pain in childbirth, and that only happened as a punishment of Eve picking the fruit. What about Adam? How is he punished? Well, he is punished by basically having to work to get food. The idea would be that in the Garden of Eden it was just really easy to get food. Everything you wanted was just there. But because of you, it says, cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil will you eat food from it all the days of your life. So in other words, it was because he did this that it was so difficult. He had to do farming and grow things, and through great effort bring about food rather than just having it there naturally. So, I suppose if you look back in ancient times when this was written, you'd say, well, it's really saying, women were seen as child rearers. That was seen as their main thing. So the main suffering for a woman would have been seen as childbirth. Men were seen as the people who had to make food or work to get food, and so the main suffering from them was how difficult it is to grow food. So it shows how they are punished by really making their life more difficult. They are also kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Now, how does what they do affect people today? Well, you could say, if a literal belief in this story, you could say, well, it's still true that women suffer during childbirth and men suffer during people suffer having to grow food in a difficult way. However, we've seen already in previous units that this story for some Christians has a wider significance. People suffer today, some people say, because of original sin. This is the time when original sin comes into the world, and for some, like Augustine, this is why there is evil in the world, because humans went against God. Fourth one, what role does the devil play? Well, the devil is not actually in this story directly. It never mentions the devil. However, some Christians interpret the snake as being the devil. You've probably heard that before. So some people think that the devil is there in the form of the snake, and he tempts them to go against God. Okay, so that's the actual story, but we're going to look at why is the story important to Christians. And we're going to look at two people here. St. Augustine, who we've looked at before. We know he has a lot to say about the fall, and we're going to look at John Hick. So first thing we're going to do, John Hick, by the way, is someone who follows Irenaeus. In fact, I think we used a quote from John Hick to illustrate the Irenaean theodicy when we looked at what Irenaeus said about the problem of evil back in the Belief in God unit. So what I want you to do first of all is I'm going to read through what they have to say about the fall. The idea is that you should be able to provide two different Christian views about what the significance or importance of the fall, that story, is to Christians. So let's read through each one, and then when we've gone through them, you could go to the other side or other page of your handout, of your Why is the Fall Important handout, and see if you can complete those activities. So this stuff is all on this handout called Why is the Fall Important to Christians? The traditional view. So the traditional view of the fall comes from Augustine. This is the view that's been most influential in the Christian church. The traditional view of the story of the fall of Adam and Eve was explained by St. Augustine, one of the most important Christian philosophers of all time. He lived in the 4th century AD. Augustine believed that when God created the world, it was perfect. Adam and Eve brought evil into the world by going against God. This affected humans in two ways. Number one, all humans after Adam and Eve were born with original sin. This means they inherited the guilt of Adam and Eve's first crime against God. 2, all humans after Adam and Eve were born with a tendency to go against God and commit more sins. So the world went wrong in a couple of ways. Even if human beings now didn't do anything wrong, they still have that original sin. They still have the guilt of that original sin, according to Augustine. Secondly, they also have a tendency to commit sins. Kind of once they started the idea of going against God, people became more likely to do it. For Augustine, the story of the fall is more than just a bad event in the lives of two people. It is a disaster for all human beings. Because of the fall, all humans are judged as sinners by God from the moment they are born. Fortunately, Augustine thinks there is a solution to this problem: Jesus. Jesus died to save us from our sins. This means that people who believe in and follow Jesus will have their original sin forgiven and will be able to get to heaven when they die. So look, we've looked at how there's kind of some big philosophical problems with this point of view, but you really need to understand it. The idea is we're born with original sin because of what Adam and Eve did, and therefore the forgiveness of Jesus dying on the cross to forgive people's sins, is needed so that people can get to heaven, even if those people haven't done personally anything wrong. The truth is, what Augustine would say, is most people have done stuff wrong because they're also born with a tendency to go against God that comes from Adam and Eve. Okay, let's look at Hick. So this is Hick's view, the alternative view. So many liberal Christians today have a different view of the fall. Just to say something about this, why do people have a problem with Augustine's view? Well, one, a lot of people don't think the fall is a literally true story, so therefore Augustine's view wouldn't work if it never really happened. And secondly, a lot of people don't think it makes any sense morally, because why are we being punished for something that we didn't do wrong? So, an example of this kind of Christian is John Hick. Hick does not think the story of Adam and Eve is a true story. Instead, he thinks it's an imaginative story which helps Christians to understand how to follow God. According to this interpretation, Adam and Eve's crime was not a disaster for humanity, but a mistake from which they could learn. Hick follows Irenaeus' theodicy, which says that bad things in the world happen in order to help us to become better people. From this point of view, the suffering that God sends to Adam and Eve can be seen as an opportunity for them to learn from their mistakes so that they can follow God more closely in the future. Instead of seeing the world as a perfect place ruined by Adam and Eve's sin, Hick believes that human beings were imperfect to begin with, I think it should say, and that it is only by learning from our mistakes and growing that we can become better people. Hick's view is similar to the Jewish interpretation of the fall. Judaism has no teaching of original sin and interprets the story of Adam and Eve as an illustration of the mistakes that humans make as they journey towards perfection. So there are the two views of the fall. What I want you to do is just pause the video now and see if you can complete the tasks on the second side of that sheet. They're really just activities to help you to make sure that you've understood those two stories. So go through those activities and pause the video and then unpause it when you've finished, and I'll just go through them. Okay, you should have completed that activities. Let's go through. Activity A, which interpretation is summarised in each sentence? The fall shows how we must learn from our mistakes and develop into better people. You should have a Hick for that one. Number 2, the fall shows that everyone is born guilty and we must believe in Jesus so our sin can be forgiven. That should be Augustine. Okay, match the statement to the correct interpretations. The fall was a disaster. Augustine. The fall was an opportunity for learning. Hick. All humans inherit the guilt from the fall. Original sin. Augustine. We need to follow Jesus to overcome the damage done by Adam and Eve. Augustine. Christians should agree with the way in which Jewish people think about the fall. Hick. The world was perfect before the fall. That's Augustine. The fall helps human beings become more perfect. That would be Hick. Are these criticisms of Hick's or Augustine's interpretation of the fall? This interpretation goes against scientific evidence. That's a criticism of Augustine, right? Because he has to believe that the fall is real, and therefore he would go against the theory of evolution. This interpretation makes God sound unfair, as he punishes people for crimes they did not commit. That would be Augustine too, because we are being punished for Adam and Eve's crime. Lastly, this interpretation goes against Christianity because it means that Jesus' death was not that important. That would be Hick. Because it's basically saying, look, we don't really need Jesus' death to pay for our sins because we haven't got original sin. That would be the criticism there. Okay, so those are the two interpretations. What we're going to try and do as our last bit in our lesson is to try and put this into a 6-mark question. So I'm going to give you a structure. I'm going to talk you through it quite clearly, and I just want you to complete the 6-mark question. It'd be great if you could send it to me. That'd be fantastic. So here's the question. Put the title down. Explain the importance of the fall of Adam and Eve to Christians. 6 marks. Now you might be thinking, hold on, how do we get 6 marks? Because we've got to get 3 SEEs, and you've only given us 2 points of view. Well, that's why I'm going through this 6-marker specifically, because I think in this one, what you need to do first of all is explain the fall. So I want a paragraph explaining the fall, what it is, and then a paragraph explaining the importance from Augustine and one from Hick. So that's how I do it. Paragraph 1, explain the story of the fall in 3 sentences. Or 3 sections. We'll see what I mean by that. Paragraph 2, explain the first theory about why the fall is important in 1 SEE. Paragraph 2, explain the second theory about why the fall is important in 1 SEE. So let's just go through some sentence stuff. I would start like this. The story of the fall is explained in the book of Genesis, chapter 3. The book describes how. Explain what happened. Don't write the whole story out, but explain the basics of what happened. In the story, God punishes Adam and Eve by, say how they were punished. So far you're not interpreting the story, you're just telling the story. Here's what happened. Second SEE. For some Christians, the fall is important because, well, then you want to talk, this is the Augustinian one, so you want to say something about, because it explains the idea of original sin. Something like that. St. Augustine said that. Explain what he thinks. He thinks that because of the sin of Adam and Eve, everybody inherits this original sin, which needs to be forgiven if we want to go to heaven. This makes the story important because why is it important? Well, to me it's important because it shows why everybody needs to believe in and follow Jesus according to St. Augustine. So it makes the story important because it shows that everyone needs to follow Jesus because people need to have their original sin of Adam and Eve forgiven if they want to go to heaven. That kind of stuff. Okay, next paragraph. For some Christians, the story is important because, well, why is it important for John Hick? Well, we say because it gives us an example of how human beings can learn from their mistakes in order to follow God better. So then you explain what John Hick argues. He thinks the story is not a real story, and even if he did think it was real, he wouldn't think that it means because of that story there's such a thing as original sin. Instead, he thinks that this is a story of human beings who went against God, who suffered as a result, and the moral message of the story is for us to learn from that story to become better people. So this makes the story important because it provides an example of how we can learn from mistakes, times we've gone against God, in order to become better people and grow morally and as human beings. Hope that all makes sense. The Hick one is a bit tricky to understand, but make sure when you're trying to write your sentences, go over what I've said, look at my sentence starters, but also go back to the readings and see how would you interpret it, how can you explain it. Okay. Last slide. If we were in a lesson, we would do something with these pictures. We'd basically just go through what have these pictures got to do with what we have learned today. See if you can do it yourself. How do you think each picture is linked to what we have learned today? Okay, thanks very much, guys. Hope everyone out there is doing well. well done for the hard work that you're putting in while you're at home.